We're a funny old country. But anyway, this is our global community. It doesn't matter where your desk is or your phone is tonight. Sue's here. Who else? So let's get into the groove tonight. What are we at the moment? 34 people. You are very, very welcome. As you know, we start and finish on time. We'll say a few thanks now, actually, so we make the most of our time ahead of us. So I thank Milton Keynes University, who are hosting us tonight. And if you zoom around your screen, you can see the room where people are coming in and gathering, just a few of us tonight as we test out our first in-person hybrid event. But do not worry, this is business as usual for everybody who enjoys these events. I'm in a studio, I'm not in the room, so we're very much enjoying the company of those who have come to network and watch and view tonight on the big 90-inch screen. So thank you to them. Thank you to Milton Keynes Council as well, who support our initiative. So we've got a real local helping hand to make this global community possible. And then our great friends over at Data Reply UK, based in London, and they support us as well. Reply Group, big multinational corporation capable of many, many great things in the data and AI space, based out of Italy, but Data Reply are in London. And I strongly recommend you look them up on Google, LinkedIn, if you're interested in projects or they're hiring, and that might be something you're interested in working with them or for them. Really great company, and we appreciate them very much, as we appreciate everybody who's joining tonight. So whether this is your first event or your 20th event, lose count. It's just wonderful to be in your company tonight. We host on Zoom because we want to be in one room together, so to speak. It's not about there's them and there's us, it's all of us. So please do have your camera on if you'd like. We'll keep ours on. To have your microphone sort of muted out of courtesy for those that are speaking. But you know, very much use your microphone later on. We'll have about a half an hour, so hopefully we'll hear from one or two of you. I'm going to dash off at about 7 p.m. UK, 2 hours, but Alexandra's going to keep this session open and she's going to be hosting the after party. So that's where I want to hear more. What have you learned? What do you agree with, disagree with from what you've heard? A chance for everybody to spend some time sharing their thoughts. In a moment, Alex is going to roll a short video from Rupert Singh, and Rupert's prepared a short talk for us that will set the scene for tonight. Hello, Jackie, nice to see you. And that will set the scene on this social licensing that we're talking about as we're preparing this event over the last couple of months. I think there's some really incredible work that goes on in this space from, in fact, many of the people that are here tonight. But we have our challenges. Responsible AI, you know, self-governed AI has its challenges. Ethical AI comes with its misunderstandings and good intentions. Policy and regulation, hard to do. So, you know, these are all very, very worthwhile, very, very important. But I guess we're asking about this social license. So what about the downstream? What about the way that you interact and impact individuals, societies, communities? How do we have a level of engagement, conversation, understanding of this technology and its impacts? And how, you know, effectively, how do we make this thing more trustworthy? You know, the Edelman Trust Barometer says trust in tech is way down, right? Down 10% across the world. That's a real problem for big tech. It's a real opportunity for others as well who want to have a different business model. So we're living in an incredible time. We're moving to spatial computing, and we want to talk about the metaverse. This is massive, exponential increases in data collection. The more data you collect, the more autonomous decision-making you have to rely on. These are exciting times. What AI can do for us in personalization, healthcare, just incredible. But the downsides, the risks of the digital divide, the marginalized communities, not getting the voice of those, creating things that millions or billions of people can't access, and even those that can find it to be biased and doesn't serve those that it needs to. You know, we talk about climate change a lot, but this is up there. This really is this crux that we're at around AI, where it's destined to be a real amplifier of social inequalities if we are not very, very careful. So all of us, every one of us has a lot of work to do in our own way, together through this community and others, so that we don't we don't get that future that I'm describing. We do get an inclusive future with this incredible set of technologies. So welcome, welcome. Yeah, Matthew's showing his book. We're going to be hearing from you in a second. So this has taken quite a bit of organizing. We've got 8 contributors tonight, plus everybody else that's here. We'd like to mix up the format. So we're doing these 10-minute spotlights tonight, going through each speaker. Hopefully we'll have about 30 minutes, 40 minutes at the end to get together as a group. So you'll see people being added to the screens, a little bit like the Graham Norton style that we had last time. Each person stays on the screen. So we keep hearing from you as we go through, but we know, we're spotlighting on certain people at certain times. Jaisel's here at MKU with me in the other studio. She'll be chief moderator again tonight. Keep us on the clock, keep us on time. But please enjoy this. Be super kind to everybody here. Have a great chat on the chat session. I love seeing faces new and not old, but familiar on this. So let's jump in. Have a great session. It's 2 minutes past 5. Well, can we get a wave from MKU? Got a few people there in the room. Can you hear us okay? Can you see us okay? Can we hear you?
You can't say stuff, we can't hear you.
Amazing.
Can you hear
Amazing.
it? Hope so.
Our first hybrid event. Thank you for those that have arrived. Christian, thank you so much for hosting us, MKU, Odelia as well. All right, let's jump into gear. Right, so I actually need to hand over controls now, so I need to get Alexandra to play this short opening for us about what is social licensing. Then we'll dive in and we'll spotlight Matthew Bailey first, and we will get started. So I will do a quick co-hosting here with Alex.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, are you
ready
to share? Ready to show?
Ready.
All right, over to you. Have a great event, everybody.
Hi, my name is Rupa Singh. I'm the founder and CEO of AI Beehive. Here we are to discuss licensing artificial intelligence, whether it is critical, practical, or political. So let me start with an interesting story, which most of us might have already heard. The story of greedy King Midas. He once wished everything he touches should turn to gold. And he exactly got what he wished for. His food, his drink, his relatives, they all turned into gold. And the king died in misery and starvation. What we see here is a value alignment problem. And if you fail to align the value of machines with the value of humans, the results can be catastrophic. While humans have great potential to do great good, they also have immense potential to do great harm, and we cannot underestimate human stupidity. While we are already on the verge of crossing our planetary boundaries, such as chemical pollution, ozone layer depletion, freshwater consumption, agricultural land use, biodiversity loss, and many more, it is even more important with these emerging and cognitive technologies such as AI, which has permeated into every aspect of our lives, to be very careful while adopting AI products and services. And we need to identify, we need to anticipate, identify, and mitigate any risk that it can cause undesirable consequences. While there is a race between companies and organizations to adopt AI solutions, they also need to evaluate whether adopting AI solutions is it vital, viable, or even valuable. Just because something can be done, it does not necessarily mean that it should be done. While most of the companies require many legal, formal regulatory licenses to operate a legitimate business, social licensing is another thing. It is an informal license granted to companies by its various stakeholders, including users and consumers who may be affected by companies' activities. And social licensing is about building trust and acceptance among its stakeholders. However great a product or services may be, if it is not liked by consumers and users, then the product is not good, because customers are always right.
Woo!
While we have not yet justified our existing challenges, which has been there for several decades, such as poverty, climatic effects, health issues. Now we have new sets of challenges, such as persuasion through digital nudging, making us more confused and distracted. Then we have cyber bullies, cyber wars, privacy and security concerns, stealing away our peace of mind. And then we have misleading information, causing more polarization and violence in society, as well as deep fakes and misleading information, and many more. While adopting AI solutions and products, they need to adopt an inclusive and multidisciplinary approach, not only for international laws, but also including ethics, philosophy, politics, economics, diplomacy, computer engineering, and many more, building trust and confidence among its various stakeholders, and ensuring that AI products and services are responsible, safe, and ethical, and beneficial to people across the globe. Whether artificial intelligence licensing, is it critical? Yes, definitely it is critical, because of its volume, velocity, and affordability of adoption is huge. And if it gets into nefarious hands, then it can be really challenging. Whether AI licensing, is it practical? Well, it's quite challenging, because we are many of us, and we have many preferences. Our preferences, thinking, and choices are shaped by our various and diverse backgrounds, such as economic, educational, religious, and political backgrounds, that shapes our thinking and preferences, and trading of those preferences can be really challenging. And we need a global cooperation to address all those issues, to ensure that we are creating a product which is accepted and responsible, as well as ethical, for the entire globe and society. Well, it all boils down to our intentions and purpose of creating such solutions. And we have great MKAI panel for discussing about AI licensing, whether it is critical, practical, or political. And we are happy to know your questions and feedbacks, and we will do our best to address any of your questions. So let's hear from panels, their experience and expertise in the field of AI. Thank you.
Rupa, thank you so much. I think you're there, aren't you, Rupa?
Yes, thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much for doing that. So check out Rupa's work, AI Beehive, connect with her on LinkedIn, and definitely get stuck into what she's working on right now and learn more about her. Rupa, thank you so much for being with us tonight and preparing that. See some new people arriving, VibHab, you're very, very welcome, and others who have joined us. You're very, very welcome to put your details into the chat. You know, we're not hard and fast on these kind of rules, so you can just kind of put your LinkedIn in there if you want people to know you, but we try and get a little bit more organized. So if I can ask Alex to put in the LinkedIn posts that we've created so that we can find each other very easily on LinkedIn without filling up the chat with just URLs. So if she pops that in now, then go ahead on there give it a like or give it a little comment, and then obviously you can see everybody else that's commenting and find them very easily and connect with them to build your own networks through this. Let's see if we can start spotlighting. So let's start with Matthew. There you are. Thank you.
Hi, Richard. Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
Putting you up on the big screen here. Jaisal, if you can do the same for you. I don't always work the controls that quickly. Matthew, let's start with a doozy on this. We've heard from Rupa. Well done, Jaisal. How practical is what she's talking about at the moment?
I think it's imperative, and I've got a few things to share with you. I think that social licensing is a reflection and an opportunity for inclusion in shaping the future of artificial intelligence. And when we look at social licensing, we shouldn't be considering just the people of today, but we should also be considering the civilizations of tomorrow and what we're leaving as part of their inheritance. Are we getting permission for these big tech companies and for big AI? Are we getting license from the civilizations tomorrow to say, yes, that solves a UN SDG. Yes, we're in harmony with our planet. Yes, we have social equity. So this goes to a fundamental consideration of the purpose of the human destiny. And there's something we're going to be putting on AIethics.world, and I'm going to dive into a little bit more in a minute, Richard, is that we're currently in World 1.0, which is basically a chaotic AI universe, right? And we have all these problems with the UN SDGs, right? Once we start to bring AI in line with our values and using it to solve problems that we have globally, then we can start moving to a new world reality, World 2.0, where machines and humans are working together and are leaping beyond some of these measures of how poor our world is at the moment, which is the UN SDGs. And then, if we do the right thing, we then move into World 3.0, which is a real alignment between humans and machines, where our humanity is within machines and we're moving forward. We're not going to utopia, we're moving forward, and we'll always continue to move forward, Richard, because we have the universal principle of creation within us, and we can't stop creating. So if we're going to create, let's create well. So we're in a World 1.0 world reality at the moment. What we're looking at is how do we bring chaotic AI into kind of more of stabilization. And we've seen responsible AI and trustworthy AI. Now, we need to be careful we don't get hoodwinked by these two terms. They're very good for best practices, i.e. trying to bring order to chaos. And they look at the application layer, which is basically an AI for Alexa or AI in decision-making for a job or in a dissemination of funds. And then the context layer, which is where all the AI ethicists are focusing at the moment, which is non-maleficence, fairness, and other things as well. But what they're not going to is a digital mindset of artificial intelligence, which is the third layer. And the thing is, Richard, is that if someone uses responsible AI practices and someone else uses responsible AI practices, the digital mindset of artificial intelligence will be different. And let me explain why. The first thing is that one company might be using a high carbon net zero footprint for their AI life cycle. That means they're aligned with Green Nation. Another company may have a very poor carbon net zero footprint. We have two ethical issues, paradoxes between what meant to be the same AI, but actually have a different way the digital mindset's being built. The same with privacy. If an AI is built and a framework of models built in the US on very poor data privacy and data regulation, they can't export to the European Union because they have tighter measures. The digital mindset in the European Union of AI will be much, much more integrated with their GDPR and will honor the aspect of us being able to control our data, where in the US it is not. So we need to measure the digital mindset of artificial intelligence and bring in the foundational layer. And that's why the ethical AI certification maturity model is so important. So what we're looking at, Richard, is real issues around importing and exporting if we truly want a pure ethical centric artificial intelligence from its digital mindset through to its context into its application. And that's what we need to do. So when it comes to licensing, Richard, we have to look at whether a company or an organization are outsourcing their trust to another company or a set of companies that may be beholden to different values and ethics, and maybe building the digital mindset differently based on theirs. So we need a clearinghouse. We need basically some kind of border control to measure the digital mindset of artificial intelligence that aligns with the AI constitution or the purpose of the nation, right? So for example, one nation may say all AIs must be built with a 50% carbon net zero footprint across the entire life cycle, right? So we do need these new, these measures of the ethical quality of artificial intelligence, just to find out where we're at, Richard, and then basically then keep on maturing into better and purely ethical centric futures where we may get to carbon net zero for AI. We may get to full user agency. And the other thing is, you know, privacy, everybody, is not user agency. Don't be hoodwinked by this. So user agency is you having full control over your data. You know how your data is being used, you're in decisions and in part of how AI is being used. You're part of the digital control of your digital self, which is, are you the owner of your digital self? Is this part of the human sovereign experience? So we must absolutely look at user agency as part of our ethical measures. And companies do not want to look at this because they're hoodwinking through data privacy. We're looking at user agency, which is you controlling your digital self. And that has many benefits. Is that once you have full user agency, you can now bring your digital self back into one place, and you can start having a personalized AI, a digital life guru. Now, what this means is this is bigger than the mobile phone or the personal PC, where you can have a digital life guru that's your guide to assist you in a self-actualized lifestyle, at which point then we're looking at an advancement in the human species. We're looking back on those challenges of the UN SDGs and saying, well, that was yesterday. We're way beyond this now. So those are a few thoughts. I think that licensing is good as long as they have the companies and nations have their ethical boundaries, clearinghouse in place to ensure that there's a baseline of the quality of AI that's being deployed within their nation. Otherwise, we're looking at chaos, Richard. And this is one of the problems with responsible AI and trustworthy AI. They are missing the fundamental thing that is needed for us to build a solid bedrock for going forward. I'll stop there.
That's really wonderful, Matthew. Just another question that comes to mind while you talk about the current maturity model. What do you think about the corporate culture? We have talked about a little about the profitability and the difference between different corporates outsourcing their work. But what about the corporate culture in itself? When we talk about the different biggies, or we talk about companies who are just starting to implement AI, what do you think about their mindset?
That's a great question. I think that I wrote a whole chapter on culture in the book, and in the second version, we're going to write a lot. Culture is everything. And I think Richard mentioned this, is that AI is a mirror back to the quality of our humanity. It's a mirror back to the quality of how our culture is. And Giselle, I think we're looking at a new culture that's inclusive, collaborative. As we build these new systems of people, planet, and profit, what I think we're going to realize, Giselle, is that the people do well, the planet does well, the profit actually is exponential in growth. And so I think as part of the new system paradigms, Giselle, we absolutely need to look at new types of cultures within business. Because the thing is this, Giselle, we have the universal force of creation going through us. So we shouldn't control that. We should find a way to liberate that so that we're actually working together in a new, effective way that really does do well for the future of the company, the nation, and also a legacy we can be proud of. Definitely
a marriage between innovation and the ethical and responsible AI, to be honest. I think that's really great. But what do you think, as of today, where are we? What do you think about where are we? We want to look at a better future, but where are we? What do we think about ourselves as of today? Is it really good? Is it looking good?
So we're in a world 1.0 reality, which is an awakening. you know, we've been given this gift of an intelligence that literally, to be clear, everybody, it's dumb. It feels no love. It feels no compassion. It only does what its masters tell it to do. However, it is faster at a horrendous pace at decision-making and logical sequencing and other things that can really help us to move forward in our automation. So where we're at now is a choice point of whether we decide to innovate based on the systems of the past, which I think will lead to chaos, or whether we decide that actually enough's enough. Let's start to embrace this power of the human experience, this power of community and collaboration. Let's start building new systems in the future. And that's the choice point. And what we're seeing, Giselle, is this, is that people are start trying to build responsible AI and trustworthy AI on old system designs. And we have to start looking at, but they're good at grounding the chaos. So we have some kind of consistency, which is important. But what we're looking at, I think, is basically an opportunity to create new systems. And we need to create new systems because this machine and this human are going to have to find some form of symbiotic relationship and find some kind of symbiotic partnership. And now is the time to get into the DNA of artificial intelligence, which I talk about in the book, and basically put our humanity, start to put it in to artificial intelligence itself. And for all the professors on this call that don't believe you can put humanity in artificial intelligence, don't be limited by a mindset. This is where we open our mindset and we innovate beyond our imagination. And this has got interest. So I think we're at choice points now, Giselle. I think most people want to do well. I think we're trying to find the right systems and approaches for us to move forward. But we have some more work to do and some more hard questions to address regarding the digital mindset of artificial intelligence and preparing it for an evolutionary cycle with humanity.
Absolutely, Matthew, well said. And now is the time. I think over to you, Richard, as we want to call upon Jackie.
Yeah, for sure, Matthew. You've got us started with a bang, nice high energy, and lots of thoughts. Rupert, it's good to have you here on the screen as well. Let's keep those mics open in terms of those that are spotlighted. Jackie, I wanted to call on you next. Now, Matthew's not going anywhere. He's staying with us here, but just to kind of move that virtual spotlight over a little bit. We've got a trust problem, though, haven't we, at the heart of this?
Yeah, so while I think I'm in complete agreement with Matthew in terms of where we want to end up and what end game is, I'm probably in disagreement, maybe not so much with Matthew, but with the premise that social license can be the engine for that endpoint. And so let me start a little bit about, so where I'm coming from is, I think I come from a regulatory background. Okay, I come from a world in which I started in the broadcast space and then moved into the online space, and where in the broadcast space, we looked at the outset at the power of the technology. And I'm talking about going back to 1920s. We looked at the power of radio, telecommunication, and then a television. And we said, these are really powerful mediums. They go into people's homes. They have the power to shape people's thinking. They have the power to inform people, to educate them, to entertain them, to give them insights into the rest of the world. These are super powerful technologies, okay? So what do we think about them? How shall we regulate them? And we had that conversation before we did a single thing. And we decided that they were too powerful to be left in the hands of the private sector, too important to be left in the hands of the state. So we created a model around one step removed from the state, but around licensing of radio stations and television stations and so on. And we looked at regulation in both a positive way, i.e. aspirational. What can regulation do to make all of these services and these technologies aspire to their greatest heights? And what can regulation do to stop them going down the route that we know, they're capable of, and poisoning the public discourse and shaping the environment for the wrong? And we started off with that model. And it served us very well. I'm talking about the UK here. I know it's been a model that's been copied elsewhere, but we started from that premise. We didn't let the technology out of the box and then go, whoa, 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 you know, what do we do now? So I'm a big fan of regulation. I always think that higher standards lead to better outputs. And my work then moved on, and I did quite a few studies on the power of regulation around specific things. So in the UK, we had regulations within broadcast licenses around how much news and current affairs broadcasters had to do and what standards they had to meet. The minute a broadcaster was let off any of those obligations, they no longer did it, okay? So the regulation, we had direct evidence, and we had comparisons of when they were let off doing certain amounts of children's programming, but the regulation stayed in place for news and current affairs. They dropped all the children's program and just carried on doing what they do. So I had direct experience of how regulation can actually condition the space and make people do things. I then moved on to looking at the online world. So as my world of media, communication, content began to move online, we had a set of regulations that were for one set of technologies and one set of platforms, but all the action was moving online. And remember, in the early days of the internet, we were all absolutely wowed by its potential as a democratic force for good. We could talk to everybody. It would be brilliant. And off it went. And we sat there and we went, wow, this is amazing. And, you know, they moved fast and they did break a lot of things. And it was both wonderful, but it has also created, someone else's phrase, a chaos factory. And I'm now involved in trying to work with the UK government and grab that particular genie and stick it back in its bottle, or stick bits of it back in its bottle. And I can tell you, it's very hard to do it once it's already out there. And a lot of it was because we didn't know what the end result would be. It's not quite black box in the way we talk about AI, but it was certainly conceived as one thing and went on to become many other things. And now we are dealing with the outcomes of an unregulated online space and how we might possibly bring it back into social control. And I can tell you, self-regulation has failed. There is no way there would be the opportunity or the environment to ask those companies to be better, to engage with the community, and to come up with some kind of co-created social license to do what they do. Every time it's been left for them to do a little better, they will do the minimum and then you know, go elsewhere where the rules are less onerous. We know that. We know that for a fact. And so the only thing that I think will make an impact on that space is when it's legislation and regulation. And we've seen that in relation to children online. You know, everybody said you cannot regulate services that are accessed by children by putting age assurance measures in. You know, the internet will fall down, it will all collapse. And of course they didn't. All the companies went out there and they innovated and they came up with things, and they're now abiding by the legislation, certainly in the UK. And I think the other problem with social license, you know, it's a great thing, the idea that you get, you know, permission of your stakeholders and the community in which you operate, and you build trust together. You show that you're legitimate. You show that you have credibility. Together you build trust. But actually there aren't really that many models of it working in practice. You know, the idea of social license and you know, corporate social responsibility and all the other similar things are usually introduced in response to something awful happening or something awful already being in place, and then we try and row it back. And it doesn't really work, and it certainly won't work in a global space rather than a very limited geographical space where you can say, for example, you know, there might be changes to the fishing laws in around a particular island, but we would give indigenous people who are used to fishing there our permission. We would give them a social license to carry on doing what they want because we recognise their, you know, their stakeholding in this, and it's very specific and very small. But beyond that, it doesn't really work. And I look at artificial intelligence and then extended reality further down the line as being, you know, almost the latest iteration in this line of technology, which is around data, communication, content, using what we know about people to develop products and so on, and then feed them back to them or impact them by it. And I just do not see how, without regulation, without laws, without all the things that will hopefully end up where Matthew wants to see us, you know, that's explainable, that's, you know, that's responsible, that's ethical by design, where the responsibilities live at the very, very top at board level, etc., 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 with attendant liabilities. My view is that without that much stricter, formal, political, regulatory framework, this won't happen. And AI will be a bit like the Wild West in the way that the online world will be. And all of the opposition around it, it will kill innovation. You know, it will kill investment and so on. That never turns out to be the case. What you get is innovation, but you get innovation within a space. And it needs somebody, some country, some quarter to be the pioneer in this. And then often what you get is people fall into line and go, oh, look, they did that over there and the sky didn't fall in. So I think social license, the ideas that underpin social license, that we ought to be involved in the things that impact us, and we ought to have a say in them, and we ought to understand them, and we ought to be able to trust them, are all right. But I don't think you get to that outcome via something as warm and cuddly as social license. I think it needs a super powerful framework of, you know, as I say, legislation and regulation around it.
Jackie, thank you so much for that. A quick one from me. You know, you've seen the work that's gone on in the broadcast space. Interesting, you know, the internet came out of academia, much like artificial intelligence has, which is not the case for other emerging technologies. How does a government, how does a regulatory body recognize the good from the bad? Because it all starts, doesn't it, as this exciting world of innovation, entrepreneurship and startups that we all rally behind and get excited about. Interesting timing. So Lush, people might know, the natural cosmetics company, they're off social media today. Well, they stay on Twitter, but they're off all, you know, they're off everything else, Facebook and so on, because of the harm it's doing. But it didn't look like harm, did it, 10 years ago? It looked brilliant, and it was going to connect you with all your old friends and help you have a more connected, better life. And now we find out it was truly awful in almost every sense, for social harm and teenage suicide and everything like that. So how do we see it? How do we not look at AI companies in healthcare and go, my goodness, this is incredible? Yeah.
So you're right in that we can never know how the technology is going to evolve. And we, you know, it's the same with, you know, we can't, or we talk in the space that I'm working in at the moment, in the online space, we're talking about, we need risk assessments for the algorithms that decide the social media models that will send you this content or recommend this. But actually, even if we have the data, we don't necessarily know what the modeling is going to do and where it's going to, and we don't know, even if it comes up with that output, how that output will be interpreted around the line. But you have to start with the principle that, you know, you need to stick some kind of framework around it. And when you stick a framework of regulation around something like you do with like we did with broadcast here, you keep something alive, you keep something evolving, you revisit it frequently, you have ongoing consultations, you revisit the licenses, you look at what's changing, you take advice from stakeholders, you ask people to contribute, whether they're academics or practitioners and so on, and you make yourself open to all sorts of voices about people who are looking ahead. But you already have a framework that you can alter and adjust and so on. And when you look at the online world, none of that happened. You know, we are still, people knew when they, back in 1998, you know, what the internet was capable of. And we had a chance in 2003, certainly in the UK, when we created a big Communications Act. Everyone knew about it, but none of the lawmakers and none of the politicians really wanted to address it. There is no mention of the internet in that act, and it hasn't been updated since. Because, you know, it was a bit like, there be dragons, let's not go there, let's kick the can down the road to another administration. I think the difference with AI, certainly in my experience in my Western European world, is there is conversations happening now. Countries are having AI strategies. We have a number of data and artificial intelligence quasi-government bodies that are working in this space. We put funding into organizations. We have a national AI strategy. Europe's just come out with, you know, an AI regulatory strategy. We're doing it, even though artificial intelligence is already framing the world, we are actually thinking ahead about what that might look like, which we didn't do for the internet. We certainly didn't have plans around it. So yes, you can't foresee the future, but you can certainly understand the type of practices, the type of principles, the type of inputs, and the type of ongoing engagement that you want to have with people who know, and you keep that very much, you know, at the forefront of all of your activity.
Thanks, Jackie. Matthew, you have raised your hand. Sure, please go ahead and comment what you feel about what Jackie has just raised.
Yeah, when we get to the panel discussion, can we talk about national clearinghouses as part of regulation, if that's okay?
It's a very quick comment.
Thank you, Richard, for the next speaker.
Yeah, Jackie, thank you so much. And let's hear more from that. Yeah, hopefully you saw some of the comments coming through on the chat, appreciating the insights that you were bringing. I saw Matthew nodding in many places, Rupert too. Nicole, welcome to the stage, and thank you so much for being with us tonight. We haven't done an awful lot on intros so far, but let's not continue on that trajectory. Nicole, just tell us about yourself for a few seconds so we get the picture of you.
Yeah, happy to. And I'm really honored to be among such a distinguished group of folks to discuss this really important topic. So I'll start with a self-intro. My name is Nicole Dupuis, and I work with the Intelligent Transportation Society of America, where I serve as the Vice President of Innovative Mobility and Emerging Technology. You know, my previous colleague, who I agree with everything she said, addressed kind of the global policy arena. I'm going to try to talk a little bit about the local government perspective. Generally, that's the space in which I work. For those of you who don't know what we call ITS America, it's a Washington, D.C. based membership and advocacy group for the development and deployment of intelligent transportation systems in the United States. So the organization was established in 1990 as a not-for-profit organization that fosters the use of ITS technologies in surface transportation systems. As you can imagine, a lot of the elements of the mobility ecosystem are becoming more and more dependent on artificial intelligence and machine learning, as we see more developments in the autonomous vehicle arena, connected infrastructure, you know, smart city applications, and e-governance, and even things like urban air mobility, which is really rapidly kind of developing in later days. A few things that I just want to start off just to kind of level set, because we can't always assume that we're using the same terminology and that everybody knows what everyone else is talking about. So just from our perspective at ITS America, we think of technology as the means, not the end. It has to be regarded as a means by which we create the world we wish for, not the golden ticket in and of itself. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a level set. We also believe that mobility is a human right. People have the right to get to where they work, eat, play, pray, live. We just, because there are so many different definitions, and I really actually despise the term smart city, but I do want to just provide a definition before we get into this conversation, is this notion of an urban area which relies on information and communication technologies to build economic growth and improve quality of life and underpin governance structures. So just wanted to kind of put all those things out there. A lot of the conversations that we have are in the context of this notion of the smart city, in which, you know, smart city technologies require the processing of an enormous amount of data quickly, through the use of algorithms and through the use of different data sources, combining different data sets, and then, you know, using AI to help to provide a service, make a decision in the governance context. So certainly big data and AI are very tightly coupled in this case. You know, I think that in the context of mobility and transportation and connected infrastructure, all of this this notion of AI sifting through large quantities like terabytes of data on behalf of a city depends on whether it's supervised or unsupervised AI. How is it collecting the data? Is it raw data? How is it carrying out, and how is it programming, or how is it programmed rather? How is it carrying out the tasks? And how is it kind of making decisions on behalf of what constituency? So use cases, just a few standard use cases for kind of AI in the mobility space, at least. Obviously, public transit, cities with vast transit infrastructure and systems can really benefit from applications that can harmonize the experience of riders, give riders kind of that unified, flawless customer experience from beginning to end, the complete trip. There's also the public safety use case. You have networks of sensors and cameras that can be used in conjunction with traffic lights. They can ease congestion on roadways. They can, serve safety, serve to create better safety outcomes on the roads. And cities can easily gather data on accidents or choose other factors to measure in order to develop predictive and preventative measures for things like this, like public safety. So as my colleagues have already really addressed, there are a number of legitimate concerns that arise when we apply, especially AI, to the public sector, to the public universe. These might include data privacy risks. There might be where you have data processed by systems that include personal data of employees of the city or suppliers. You have facial recognition and biometric systems for monitoring people. And then, of course, safety. When we're talking about transportation, safety is always kind of out there as a concern. So I know I also want to briefly address, and I know my colleagues on the panel coming after me will do a much deeper dive on this, but algorithmic bias. Which, a repeatable error in a computer system that creates an unfair outcome, such as privileging one arbitrary group over another, making unintended or unanticipated decisions that relate to the way the data is collected, coded, selected, and used. A notable 2019 study found that even the most advanced algorithms struggle to recognize Black and brown faces, and that is undoubtedly of concern. The other thing I want to just kind of quickly address is that we know the majority of coders and programmers are white males. In Silicon Valley here in the United States, there's a pretty good chance they're from a handful of the same universities as well. So that creates a very limited perspective among the folks who are responsible for developing these algorithms. So as somebody who has worked extensively with the public sector and on issues that sit in the public sector like mobility, I just want to talk about how government can start to think about building public trust around the use of these sorts of technologies, and about what the role of government is in engaging, communicating to, and earning the trust of the public as they deploy these new technologies. So first and foremost, just like any other project in the government space that the government embarks on, public engagement is key. If you're spending taxpayer dollars, building things that serve and impact people, everyone in the community needs to be at the table for that. It's sort of the nothing about us without us mentality. This is not a new concept, but for some reason, often when we talk about technology, specifically civic tech and who it might be good for, we tend to skim over these sorts of things in a way that we might not have say we were building a bridge or siting a building. There's immense value in turning to the public for buy-in when you start a citywide technology pilot. Ultimately, that getting buy-in and feedback at the front end puts you in a better position to be able to carry forward with the pilot afterwards. Second, we must ensure that we are engaging all communities, not those individuals in positions of power or authority, or have the loudest voices, or who can make it to the public meetings, but all communities. Low-income communities and communities of color might be impacted differently by new technologies, by AI. They might have different needs, concerns than their white neighbors or resource neighbors. Additionally, when it comes to transportation, specifically, low-income individuals might be the most dependent transit riders. So we need to certainly buy-in from them at the output. When we need to understand, does everybody want this? How does this affect everyone? Is there a sentiment that we're overlooking regarding these new technologies? And then third, when we start these projects, we need to make sure new technologies are serving everyone in a jurisdiction equitably, and that local policy and regulatory frameworks prioritize and reflect that. So we need to ensure that one community is not receiving a different standard of service or having a very different experience than another community. And finally, I just want to talk very briefly, and I'll end on this note, about how the conversation related to civic technology and AI, machine learning, playing a role in our public life has really changed over the last probably decade. You know, when we first started talking about connected cities and connected mobility, there was overwhelming excitement about the potential. But since then, the conversation has thankfully turned toward equity and environmental justice and privacy and other things that are much more human-centered, which ultimately is what mobility should be at the end of the day. It should be human-centered. And I think that's, you know, an appropriate and welcome turn. So I'll conclude there. I know there's a lot more to unpack, but I look forward to your questions and to engaging with the rest of the panelists.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I think that was entirely action-packed, and you highlighted rightly the risks and what should be done in the autonomous AI systems, definitely. I would like to call upon Vibhav, who is our MKAI community head, and he would be giving the updates for our community. Over to you, Vibhav.
Hi everyone, this is a fantastic event, and I'm going to pick up on Nicole's last word because that will be one great way of explaining MKAI. So we spoke about human-centered. So one of our missions is on human-centered artificial intelligence. MKAI, we have a fantastic panel here. We've had words like bias, privacy, and different elements come in. If you're thinking on artificial intelligence and you may not know what it means, you're thinking on what it may mean, or you're just curious about what that space is. MKAI is a community which has people from different walks of life, and we're collectively thinking on AI based from your perspective. In our community, each view, each voice, each thought matters. There are different ways to get involved with us. We're just going to share a Telegram link, which is a conversation where you can join us between the events and start an AI conversation and join a community where everyone is thinking together. And let me just, to end this at a caveat, we don't claim to have all the answers. We're not claiming to be experts. We are just people together trying to think on and possibly solve, issues on artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thanks, Vibhav, and over to you, Richard.
Yeah, Vibhav, thank you so much. I couldn't have ever said it better myself. Let's add another spotlight. Nicole, thank you so much for what you were saying. You mentioned urban air transportation, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to include you in this conversation, because you know it's one thing knowing that you're being used in AI system, it's another going up in the sky and knowing that AI is driving and robots are powering. And so you really do work in an industry that has to really understand trust and risk and inclusion and you know, and disabilities and all these things that physically actually have to happen. So I will hear more from you later on, I hope, as well. Danielle, welcome to the stage. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. Can we get one of those turbo intros as well for you?
So hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Davis, and I am the Tech and Telecom Policy Counsel for the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council, more commonly known as MMTC here in Washington, D.C. We are the nation's leading nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving equal opportunity for people of color and women in the mass media, telecommunications, and technology industries. I support MMTC's work in primarily 3 areas: tech, media, telecommunications, which includes data privacy, AI, and civil rights in the digital age. And I look forward to having a great discussion today.
Great. And you're happy with how everything's going at the moment?
Not necessarily.
Oh, You better fill us in then.
And so basically, in the US right now, we can talk about how the laws are impacted by AI. So this basically depends on where you live. So many countries and regions have a privacy legislative framework, like the European Union, for example. Their comprehensive privacy law is the GDPR. It requires companies to ask for some permissions to share data and gives individuals rights to access, delete, or control the use of that data. But the United States, that is not necessarily the case. Historically, the US has had a bunch of, a mix of a patchwork of federal and state laws. We do not have a singular law that covers all types of data. Instead, we have a patchwork of area-specific laws, meaning that these laws either look at specific types of data, like credit data or health information, or they look at a specific population like children and regulate within those realms. So for example, I spoke on health information. That would have been HIPAA, which basically it governs healthcare and health insurance personal data protection. We also have the Children Online Privacy Protection Act, which is COPPA, and it protects personal information of those who are, I believe, 12 or 13 and younger. So in addition to that, we also have the state laws. They have the ability to create their own laws, and many of them have. So there are currently, I believe at the moment, the last time I checked, was 3 states that have passed comprehensive data privacy laws. We have California, and they just had an amendment to theirs, which some consider to be the strongest of all of the 3 that we currently have, because they have a limited private right of action. Basically, they will be able to sue a company due to negligence with regard to data privacy breach. Then you also have Virginia, and you also have Colorado. A lot of experts here in the United States do not necessarily like the Virginia law, and believe that it is very, what would be the word? Industry, I guess, affirming, not necessarily doing anything that's going to change or to address the issues that we're currently addressing. So what's not working? Everything that I just said. There's a patchwork of laws. So you can see with the range of different laws, it's easy to see how people can get confused about what rights they do and do not have. And to add to that, like we said, in addition to the federal laws, we also have the state laws. So we're essentially unregulated in a sense where we don't have one central law, and it caused many companies to take on this anything goes mindset, and it's very much so been reflected in what we've been seeing, and it hasn't been beneficial to us thus far.
Absolutely. I think it's wonderful to hear this, Danielle. And what do you think about the entire project life cycle and the accuracy around it? What thoughts do you have around that?
Well, before I get there, I think we kind of have to talk about like trust and accuracy within AI. Like trust can be tricky because on some level, we all trust AI on some level. Like, for example, I trust AI to use my GPS to get me from point A to point B. I trust it in that way. That may be a small example of trust, but then again, it can get tricky on another level where sometimes humans tend to look at the AI or treat the AI as if it's inherently more accurate or more fairer or less biased than humans. And we need to treat algorithms and AI and we need to account for the fact that they are not inherently more accurate, more fairer, less biased than humans. Because what has been abundantly clear is that AI replicates human biases. So, but what's more troubling about that is not only does the AI replicate these human biases, but because it's AI and that the term has a certain, weight on it, it confers onto these biases a certain scientific credibility. And it makes it appear as though these predictions are somehow they have some grand objective status. And we know that's not true. Like, we just know that that's not the case. For example, in the United States, we can see how law enforcement agencies are incorporating facial recognition technologies into their body-worn cameras. And this has grave implications for our constitutional rights in the United States, primarily our First and our Fourth Amendments. When we talk about our freedom of speech, our freedom of association, and our right to privacy. What does it mean when an officer walks into a constitutionally protected area with a camera into your home that's supposed to be private, protected? What does that mean for us? These are the questions that are coming up within the US legal system. We also have the criminal justice system using predictive risk algorithms to decide who is given bail. ProPublica had a great article on that a few years ago. And a lot of the evidence in that shows that the only thing that was different was the color of people's skin and how much they essentially got time, or whether or not they got bail. We also have employers and universities using these algorithms to decide who gets accepted and who gets hired. Banks and financial institutions are using these algorithms to decide who gets approved for a loan. Like, we're seeing how AI in each of these areas at the same time are not 100%. So it can result in these privacy and free speech violations, but even more so, which could be a whole nother event, Richard, it could cause and reinforce social biases of race, economics, gender, sexual orientation, and ethnicity. So what's like the solution? I just said a whole lot, like what's the solution? And I don't necessarily think that there's a one size fits all solution to this problem, but I do believe that there are certain steps that we can be taking in our country that will address the issue in some type of way. Number one, there needs to be a push to educate our citizens on the pros as well as the cons of AI. We can't only want to use AI when we're using the Oculus. We can't only want to use AI when it's fun and it's exciting. We have to understand as we continuously move into the society and how it's being dictated by AI, it's imperative that we all understand and are knowledgeable not only on the benefits, but the ethical and legal implications outside of what most people are used to when we think of AI and how it can impact their lives without them knowing it. And I know I'm probably going over time, but I have one more point, but more importantly, and Richard and Nicole touched on this. Matthew and Nicole touched on this. Companies need to think more foundationally. And some of the viewers also touched on this about the inaccuracies and biases that we see in AI and the ethical concerns it presents. They can do this by reimagining what diversity and inclusion looks like within their companies in every stage of development. So like when, I don't know who spoke about it, but like when we talk about Silicon Valley, the National Urban League, which is one of the leading civil rights organizations in the United States, conducted a study on the diversity in Silicon Valley at the top 4 tech firms there. Out of 40,000 employees, only 1,000 of them were Black. Only 1,000 of them were Black, and that's one study. So we need to be thinking about how we can incorporate diversity at every stage, like when they're writing the algorithms and when they're training the data sets, because what we really have to understand is that AI systems are trained to think like those who designed them. So we have to keep in mind that behind every algorithm, there's a person, and that person's set of values, beliefs, ethnicity, and cultural intelligence can influence how that algorithm is written, what data the algorithm is trained on, and how the machine learns. So just to sum it up with an example, I'm not going to name any names, but if there's a prominent tech company that teaches its facial recognition technology or software to recognize human faces, but has only mostly used Caucasian males as its main data set, then it would make sense if the software didn't recognize Black female faces, because the data set didn't include enough Black female faces. The machine could not learn what I look like. The machine couldn't learn, therefore the software was unable to accurately recognize Black female faces, such as Michelle Obama, Serena Williams. Like, these are people we can see, but the AI can't necessarily identify. So what I'm trying to say is that bringing multiple backgrounds and ethnicities and races and religions together could only be a benefit. And essentially diversity and inclusion is going to help mitigate the bias that we do see in AI.
Danielle, thank you so much. And you weren't over time, and I'm very glad you took the time that you did. And obviously you're staying with us here on this chat. There's been comments there in the chat that, we can't just point at a pipeline issue. And of course that is very important. And we must, encourage all of our young people into, their own choices and options. But one thing that struck me when you were talking is this a sort of an authoritarian problem that we're putting AI in this position of authority? We all go to school. I went to school at a desk with a teacher over there, and then you've got the police and the government, and it's very much just do what you're damn told, right? And is that what we're attributing to AI now?
It definitely seems that way. I think another question that we all need to grapple with, that I don't think that our community, at least in the US, has grappled with, is can the machines adequately outthink us? Like, what would that mean? Like, just think about that. If they outthought us on so many different levels, what would that mean? And we have to bring all of that to the table when we're talking about these systems.
Yes, thank you so much. Oriana, welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
You've been very patient for the spotlight to swing over. Just let us know a little bit about who you are, if that's okay.
No, it's been great listening to everyone else. Everyone's made some really interesting and enlightening comments definitely today. So my name's Oriana Medlicott. I work as a senior researcher for Fujitsu, currently based in their London office at Fujitsu Research of Europe in the technology strategy unit. So I get to work with the research team and then work on the technology strategy as well. So I get to kind of see what the business strategy will look like in the future. Also work directly with the researchers who are actively researching in AI and cybersecurity and other industries. So it's an interesting hybrid role, and these issues that we're all talking about definitely trickle into the work that I've been doing. And before this, I was working as a consultant and writer and research in AI ethics. So through my experience, I've definitely spoken with a lot of organizations, a lot of people who, a lot of these issues we're talking about today are really impacting everyone's life on a daily basis.
Very much, and you're very welcome here today. I was going to say this evening, but that's not the case for some of us. It's earlier than that. But it is for us here in the UK. Danielle was describing the digital divide, that it's one of the biggest threats if we don't get this social licensing right and make it inclusive. But you're going to lose a lot of customers with a digital divide like that, aren't you? That's not good business, right?
I think the thing that we've found already in the pandemic is that we saw there's been a huge digital divide, even when you take down to, say, when we came out of the pandemic, going to restaurants where you had to scan, your barcode to get a menu up and then order that way rather than having a waiter or waitress come to the table. That meant that you needed a smartphone. So that already eliminated people who didn't have access to that through, different reasons. And we saw a number of times where there was elderly people who were just kind of sitting around in restaurants and no one was coming over to them. And that was just kind of a small example of a digital divide already that we've seen, increasing. And I think the problem is that a lot of the kind of engagement we have from maybe government organizations, they do leave out a large proportion of society who don't have access to digital. Everyone just assumes that we all have digital literacy, we're all engaged with AI, everyone knows about AI, but actually a lot of this can be kept in this kind of ecosystem chamber where it's government, tech companies, people who do work directly in this realm having these conversations, but it's kind of the wider public that can be left out, especially people with disabilities and people who from different classes who aren't able to access this through monetary reasons. So I think that's the problem that we are seeing. And I think the big issue now is how does government and tech actually engage with society on a whole and make them aware of what what we're working on, what's happening. And I think that's a real, I think, well, from my experience, I think that's been a real struggle for the government. There are obviously sections of the government that are working directly to do public engagement, but I think there needs to be more. And I think that's, yeah, the problem that we're continuing to see.
If I think back through the MKAI Forum archive, one thing we've heard a few times is that technology moves faster than laws. And I don't think any of us would necessarily disagree with that phrase. But this feels like it could be slightly different to that, because we're not asking them to have crystal balls and look 10 years ahead exactly how the technology will influence. We're asking it for not to exclude. And the example, I mean, probably people have heard me talk about it before, is that it took years and years for us to get the telecoms companies to stop locking their handsets. I don't know how it is for the rest of the world, but in the UK now, it's no longer legal to lock your handset down to one provider, which means, it's much more open. It's less likely to end up in landfill or a drawer when it could be much more widely used. That to me doesn't feel like, the law couldn't keep up with the technology. That just seemed that we didn't bake interoperability into the innovation plans for these companies. Where are we in that sort of sphere here? I mean, can we legislate for an inclusion in a space with exponential data growth and technology change?
I think I do agree with Jackie made the point that regulation is kind of the only way forward, really, when we look at, well, again, through the companies I've worked with and speak to, people are kind of just actually actively waiting, always on the edge of their seats for this regulation, especially, a lot of startups, a lot of the tech companies, a lot of SMEs are, which direction do we go? And are actively kind of looking a bit lost on what direction to take. So like we said, the EU's come out with these guidelines of regulations that are coming. The UK government is working on this as well. Obviously, recently, New York passed this bill for bias and recruitment, these are all great steps, but I think it's now putting them into action, because I do think, even though we hear the negative that obviously bigger tech companies cannot self-regulate, no, but I think their smaller companies are actually looking directly to the government to want this regulation, because they don't want to make these decisions that directly affect customers or the wider society. Obviously, there are some within that who are not thinking, but for the people I speak with and the people I work with, it's actively kind of looking for that direction. And I saw someone in the chat actually mentioning how do we get involved with the UK, I think it's the UK government or so in government, how do we actively work on these strategies with them? And I know that the UK government is actually looking to have input from companies and want to help shape their strategies for upcoming white papers, because I think that's important to hear from people who are working in the space and the wider community.
You mentioned Jackie's comment a while ago, and she's put her hand up as well. Ariana, I think they've got the volume up quite loud here at MKU, and you sound wonderful, but your microphone is...
Am I too loud?
No, I think it's catching on something. And
oh, sorry, I'll hold it like this.
We'll all figure these things out. Jackie, you had a comment on what Ariana was saying.
Yeah, just about regulation and about companies needing to know what's coming down the track in order to know which way they can go. I think that's an important aspect of regulation, which is not just stopping people doing things, but creating an environment that is predictable. So if you know what the shape of any type of regulatory environment is going to be, and given that most regulators have signed up to regulatory best practice, so they know regulation has to be proportionate, consultable, transparent, that, good regulation in advance can help companies know which way to go, what to invest in, which areas they can innovate, which areas they're going to be pulled back on. And, that just helps build an environment in which there is confidence about the future and therefore what the thinking is, the political and cultural thinking. So, it works on that level as well. And we talked at the beginning about trust, and I think having those type of predictable frameworks around things all adds to the sense of trust in the system. Remember, we can't actually have trust in AI because it doesn't have any human qualities. It's, you know, it's basically pattern learning. You can't have trust in a thing like that. You know, trust is very much a human value, and it's related to, you know, an emotive sense of something, but you can have trust in the framework that is put around the use of that, including accountability, you know, fairness, transparency, data privacy, outcomes, you know, reporting. You know, you can have trust in the system around it, rather than, it's wrong to talk about trust in the AI itself, because that's not what we mean. That's just a set of data that goes into a pipe. So I think, you know, good, sensible regulation in advance can actually help innovation, and it can help companies know which way to go and how to go.
Thank you. Manuel's put his hand up as well. I don't know if you wanted to add a quick comment.
Can we make question, or we should wait for the end of the session? That's because
if you can do me a 15-second question, I'll be glad. If it's 10 minutes, it can be at the end.
No, that's fine. I will try to make it short. Actually, I wrote it on the chat, but anyway, I mean, how much it was to Ariana actually? How much do we see that the companies are applying things like accountability, let's say explainability or robustness, in terms of their specification for the AI product? That will be one, and actually also how the structure is being applied inside the companies to comply with regulation, the EU and AI. That would be my question. That's it.
Yeah, so I think currently at Fujitsu, we currently have a framework where we're actively working on that, and accountability is something that's extremely important in Fujitsu, and that they're currently working on within our AI ethics research department, working on this framework, making sure that the technologies are abiding by this and understanding the guidelines for that. I think on a wider scale, I think accountability is something that I think people are really kind of grappling with. It kind of falls down to, again, is it the regulators? Is it the company? Is it the user? Is it, you know, all these kind of questions? I think that's something that accountability is a hard one to overall grapple with. You can have your frameworks and you can work on, you know, using these guidelines or looking to regulation, but I think the regulation will hold the company accountable in the end. So I think that's really where I believe that regulation is kind of key to the framework overall of kind of AI and AI ethics. I think I don't think regulation will solve everything, but I do think that regulation is at this point what we need, and what a lot of organizations are really looking to, because we need this kind of direction, or it's kind of working kind of in squiggly loops, kind of trying to figure out what the next best steps are.
Ariane, yes, thank you so much for your question, Manuel. Did that answer it?
Yeah, sure. That's and actually that what my feeling is still that the companies are still like prioritizing extrinsic values for solving intrinsic values, right? In terms of, you know, economical cost, in case that they apply you know, some cost for the regulation. But thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Ariane, you're here representing yourself, but obviously you do work for a large corporation. I'm not asking you to represent that corporation in this next answer, but there is an element of carrot and stick here for sure. If we compare this to climate change, which we've mentioned a couple of times as kind of corresponding challenges, there, you know, you really do have to push companies. There isn't really an incentive. Well, I think there's an incentive, which is breathable air and clean water, but apparently CEOs don't see it that way. But there isn't really an incentive to be more green until your customer demands it. But there probably is more of an imperative, isn't there, to be trustworthy? Because that's a bit more here and now, isn't it? I mean, are we in a situation where a fast food manufacturer, a fast food retailer, sorry, isn't so worried about their demand going up or down 5% next year? They're perhaps more worried that one day nobody comes, or one day nobody turns up to work, because these are tipping points that we can't see yet. Is there any talk of that?
Yeah, I think I do think that I can't obviously speak on all large corporations, but I think that they are understanding now that, you know, customers and the wider society do want a company to be, say, sustainable or trustworthy in the products that they're bringing to the market. I think that's something that is very important overall when you're looking at business strategies now. It's looking at how do we make our products sustainable? How do you make sure that they're impacting for the greater good? Otherwise, I think they're kind of aware that, you know, the younger generation is, you know, much more active in knowing that sustainability, climate change is going to impact their direct lives. It already is impacting many people's lives worldwide. And I think that's, again, with AI, people know that it's impacting, and they know that now is kind of the time to make the changes and to put these different like corporate strategies, business strategies. Otherwise, you're not going to have the same customer base or customer interest in what you're doing. Obviously, there's always going to be people who are looking to make fast products, make fast money, but I think we are moving into a direction that's looking for more sustainable. And I haven't got time, but obviously AI and machine learning itself isn't actually that sustainable, but that's a whole nother section. So I think that's also something important to consider, is how do we actually make that sustainable for the world we live in? Because we can talk about you know, putting regulation in and doing change and trust, but we need to actually make sure that the sustainable impacts of machine learning and AI is going to work for our future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jibu, welcome.
Hey, Richard. Amazing conversation, you know, very interesting. Chat is also going on, discussion also going on the chats. You know, Matthew, Rupa, Jackie, Nicole, Oriana, Daniel, Jaisal. I mean, it's been a tremendous conversation so far, you know, touching upon many areas. But before I get into my subject, let me introduce myself. My name is Jibu Elias, and I'm the co-architect and content and research lead for India AI, which is one of the national AI initiatives from the government of India. So our plan is to create a unified ecosystem to help move the whole thing forward in India. Before that, I was the research and content lead for AI in NASSCOM, which is the apex body for the IT companies, and it's you know, the advocacy board as well. And I have served as a journalist covering emerging technology for quite a few years with one of the prominent organization in India called Times of India Group, getting few cease and desist letters from Facebook for some of the articles. So yeah, coming to our topic, I just want to, I mean, we were talking a lot about future and the things that might happen, or however it goes over. But the reality is, as a species, as humans, we are terrible in predicting future. And I don't know how many of you know about the great horse manure crisis of 1984, or it's called the horse manure paradox. So what happened was, I think in 1894, you know, due to the overwhelming number of horse carriages in the streets of cities like New York and London, there was a whole problem of horse manure. You know, the streets were filled with manures, and the Times did a opinion poll, and some of the best minds in that era predicted that by 1930, horse manure would reach the level of Manhattan's third-story windows. Okay, that's quite a prediction by 1930. But what happened was, by 1912, automobiles outnumbered the number of horses. And in 1917, New York saw the last horse-drawn streetcar make its final run. So we often are very bad in predicting how things goes in the future. Now, coming to the whole topic of you know, social licensing and responsible AI, there is an interesting website that I urge everyone to check out. It's by Georgetown University's Center for Partnership on AI, right? And they have this database called Artificial Intelligence Incident Database, you know, which tracks issues which has you know, public safety issues. And you know, I think we are familiar with many of this. I think like Daniela mentioned some of the issues with the prison parole, right? I think and similar things. And the scary thing is it already has around 1,200 publicly reported cases, in this year. Now, what is the problem, right? What is the problem with the current notion of responsible AI? Everyone is how do I say, preaching a responsible AI. It's a good thing that like having a concept such as responsible AI, right? Companies can develop AI technology that works for general good, right? And to an extent, it can force businesses to observe, algorithmic fairness and avoid bias, and to identify this technology's potential effects, especially in terms of safety and privacy. Now, my personal opinion is that's not enough, right? Responsible AI, the notion of responsible AI is not enough, and I believe there are two serious reasons for that. First of all, the whole notion of responsible AI has become a sort of commoditized right now, right? It's another technology that companies are offering. So it pretty much embodies a technology-based approach to most of the problems which are socio-economic, moral, and ethical in nature, right? And even though, and the reality is it's impossible to eliminate the bias we have, right? That's the bias we have been carrying for millennia, right, as a species. And I don't think one day we are going to be fair and unbiased individuals. So that's being the problem number one, that it's a social and economic problem, as well as an ethical problem, which is trying to be solved with more technology. Secondly, without regulations, what is happening is every company has their own responsible AI framework. Companies have frameworks, countries have frameworks, you have organizations, UNESCO has one, like EU has one, right? And there is nothing unified so far. And as a result, the whole process, such as, the whole process of adherence to this process, it's a voluntary thing right now. And that's been left to the same data scientists and developers who write algorithms, who in turn cause these problems in the first place, right? So it goes in circle. So and with this problem, and even in same organization, there can be multiple responsible AI frameworks, depending on the business function. I mean, talking about big tech companies, right? And so, yeah, of course, without a proper regulations, that's the point number one. And the underlying issue here is that, we need proper regulation. And second thing is that we speak about social licensing, and yes, the technology companies have been, like getting, how do you say, legal rights to use AI. Whether it's Waymo getting a license to drive its self-driving car in San Francisco or New York or wherever, right? But we don't generally talk about the social right? I mean, and these companies generally assume that just because they have a right to legal right, they also get social right. But how do you get the social right? And that's a process where you have to build trust, and you have to build trust with the stakeholders, right, with the people, right? So it includes multi-stakeholder participation, right? Winning the trust through dialogues and discourse, right? The need for transparency, risk mitigation, and getting the communication right, and getting the education, the public education right. So these are some of my my issues with we limiting to responsible AI, as a solution, right? We need to go beyond that, and we definitely requires a unified regulatory framework, and also look into things like, look from a geopolitical perspective, right? We have, not every country is equal when it comes to human rights and other things, right? And what about a company selling some right AI technology that maybe a facial recognition software, something to an oppressive regime, or somewhere out there, right? So how do we ensure that this technology will serve the best of the humankind? And I think for that, we definitely need a global framework.
Thanks, Jibu. Jibu, There are a few questions in my mind after what you have rightly raised, especially about the unified framework that we need to come up with, and we need to go beyond responsible AI. Do you think that you have come across some use cases that you have worked upon? And are there any frameworks that we can adopt to so that these AI models, they're not misused and even do not fall into the wrong hands, which is what we don't intend to do in the future. So what do you think about the use cases that you have worked on?
So there is this interesting scenario that that is happening from India. So I think the India's AI strategy came in 2018 after much public deliberation, multi-stakeholder consultation, and it calls for AI for all, right? And the government further went on with a strategy called responsible AI for social empowerment. Now, what interested me was there is a state in India called Tamil Nadu, which is a southern state of India. And in 2020 September, the state actually implemented a policy called safe and ethical AI policy. Now, this came out as a document and it's enforceable. That's the interesting part. Now, this policy contains framework for evaluation of AI systems before public rollout, right? This is for public level AI adoption, right? And this framework also gives a scorecard, right, to ensure that these publicly deployed AI systems are safe and ethical. And furthermore, it adds a guidelines for procurement for the government, right? How do you procure an AI agent or an AI tool for a public purpose? And like I said, it is enforced by the state's IT department. And as a result, we have seen this two interesting initiatives coming from the state. One is a attendance system based on facial recognition happening in one of the schools, one of the government schools in the city of Chennai. And when you say it's facial recognition, it's of course everyone is up in the arms, and I'm not a big fan of it either. But because of these regulations, what happened is every data is stored on edge. There is it's stored locally, it's stored on the school's servers, and they have developed this how do I say this evaluation system, grading system is called TAMDEF. T for transparency, A for accountability, M for misuse protection, D for digital divide, E for ethics, F for fairness and equity. And like I said, and they have this scorecard for evaluating AI systems, right? That's called a deep max, right? So diversity, equity and fairness, ethics, privacy, data protection, misuse protection, audit and transparency, and cross geography and society. So this being the core of the solutions this state has been rolling out. Similarly, they recently rolled out a AI tool that, considering how remote healthcare is, how terrible remote healthcare in many parts of India is, they have rolled out an AI tool that will capture your eyes on a phone, and it can diagnose if you have cataract or not. So when you are dealing with healthcare, right, when you are dealing with children's education, right, these responsible AI principles are very, very, very serious. And the best part is they abide these principles and they rolled out these tools. So it will be great if we have a similar kind of a policy or a framework that's enforceable, right? I mean, what are the, I mean, we have seen from time to time, companies like Facebook getting away with doing whatever they want, then they get away. Like, how can we create a framework where there will be some course of action, against these companies who are not following these responsible AI guidelines? So that's what I feel that we require.
Thanks, Jibu. Wonderful. I think it's high time that we look at these kind of guidelines, and most of the countries will need to look at even the underlying data. And as it was rightly pointed out, that we need to feed back again and again and test how good these guidelines fit into the different sectors. And is it working well while the innovation is growing day by day? Is it really fitting? Is it becoming old or out of date? That's also one of our responsibilities. But it is good to know that governments are now looking at guidelines or frameworks, but this needs to be extended far more than that. Richard, over to you to introduce Tanya.
Yes, welcome, Tanya. I'll introduce you in just one quick second. I just want to have another moment on that point. We've talked a lot about the big nation states here and what needs to happen. We see smaller countries doing very interesting things in other areas. Barbados announced its virtual embassy this week in the metaverse via Decentraland. We saw El Salvador do some really interesting things with Bitcoin. Is there a sense that smaller country could really take on the kind of things we're talking about in this conversation, put it in as a national policy? Anybody see that happening? Any winds of change? Any countries coming into the spotlight? Matthew, perhaps you've got some thoughts?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts, and after Christmas, I can share something that I think will really surprise people, which we need to speak about. What I'm seeing, Richard, is that Latin America is starting to waken up, and also the northern part of South America. What we're starting to see is Colombia. We're starting to see Costa Rica with the Fairlac initiative. What we're starting to see other countries starting to self-determine their future with artificial intelligence. And what they're realizing in the discussions I'm having with them is that they don't import external values and external technologies. They create their own future based on their own values. And this is very, very disruptive to some of the big organizations that think that they're trying to help the world, but actually they're driven by, let's just say, an agenda that troubles me. So I'm starting to see Central America and South America doing really well. Obviously, with Japan, I think is excellent with their Society 5.0. I think they have a wonderful model that can be, and I know the UK has taken a look at Society 5.0, although I am troubled by some of the UK projects around emotional AI, which I think could be manipulative. So Japan's doing really well. We're starting to see other Central Asian countries that are starting to develop their own AI ethics standards and get into grips with this. So we are starting to see other countries move faster, Richard. And this is good because they have agility, they have read less tape. Okay, the politics is slightly different, but we are starting to see people, other nations get to grips with this. And to Jackie's point, all it takes is one nation to do something really groovy and the rest of the world will follow. I talk about this in the book. So yes, we're starting to see that. And this is important because the future should never be controlled by one organization or one nation or one group of people. It should be democratized innovation. That's where the fun is, where communities start to innovate their future together, empowered. So that's a little bit of a view from you. And by the way, if you people want to go to the metaverse, take a look at the Icelandverse video on YouTube. It's hilarious.
Thank you so much. Look forward to your updates on that. Tanya, welcome. How is your holiday?
It's been great. Thank you very much.
You're so
a little cold. Trying to get into the conference mode.
It is a cold week here for sure. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us during your trip. That's amazing. Can you give us a quick few seconds of introduction so we know a bit more about you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been working in the space of voice assistants, chatbots, so NLP algorithms, and I've been doing that for over 10 years and also participating in a lot of discussions, conferences and white papers and business school talks all about applied AI, especially for the next generation, trying to see where they fit in terms of jobs and the new types of jobs and how the whole workplace is changing.
Thank you so much. Jibu was steering us towards areas and ideas that can work and will work, frameworks, and Matthew contributed about some countries really coming online for this. What sort of green shoots do you see in your work in this area?
Right. I think obviously climate change is the #1 priority for most young people. This is something that I think is a prism that we're all going to have to look through for any type of innovation. And listening to all the speakers tonight and the contributions, I think we have to be very wary of talking about AI, artificial intelligence, as some monolithic entity. I've been saying this for 10 years now, and it's just a sort of a mistake in thinking, I think, where we're saying we're assuming that we're all talking about the same thing. As the last speaker just pointed out, it is, Matthew, it's becoming evident in different ethical frameworks, different cultural values. So the Japanese are a great example. They love robots, right? And everyone, normally when you think AI and when the media talks about AI, the first thing that your average person in the public domain thinks is a robot, a clever robot that's actually sort of threatening. If it's not fun looking, it might take my job. But the Japanese have a cultural mindset that actually adopts their robots, whether they're little robotic dogs or large service robots or companion robots, and they actually think they have a soul. So that there's actually a ritual now where you can give your robot a burial, and there's a proper ceremony, and there's a temple full of dead robots, and they have a proper spiritual parting from their favorite robot. So I think this has to be accommodated. We're not talking about a monolithic things in AI. It's a whole everything from robots to data mining to NLP to speech recognition. It's manifesting. The things I'd like to talk about is immediately data modeling, how we've managed the pandemic with AI data mining and data modeling, and how we're going to manage the next crisis or the current crisis of climate change with AI powered data mining and data modeling.
Tanya, there's been some incredible work, as you say, in that space, and hopefully will continue to be. Over here in the UK, we have had some trust issues with that. Certainly data and AI have been a great force in development of vaccines and public awareness and managing safety and so on. But we had an issue here with the NHS. We actually spoke about this, Jackie, particularly on the pre-call, did some pretty nefarious actions around data tracking. Even deciding that they would follow the routes of about 10% of people who were getting the first vaccine to see where they went and what they did without sharing that they went and track these phones. So my question, Tanya, is have we taken steps forward and backwards, do you think, through the pandemic with data?
I actually think in a crisis, this has really shown, it's brought to the fore what the problems are in new tech. And let's take smartphones. The company I work for that I co-founded, we're in AI bots, so we use AI in the space of advanced NLP so that we can identify when it's human-machine interaction. People who are from the field know HMI. Now, if you take that as an example, what's the vehicle to use to project our AI-fueled avatar? So we've specialized in life-size holographic avatars. Which, by the way, a Japanese competitor has just copied us. And we're at the forefront of this. So this is what Zuckerberg and Facebook are talking about. Metaverse is bringing 3D holographic life-size avatars, whether they be your digital twin in a smart city. We're trying to make that actually materialize. And if you're looking at that, what's the device? I've taken the sort of a radical view, if you like, that smartphones are obsolete. But I'm not alone in this. Already before the pandemic, before we were all monitored and tracked and surveilled through our own devices, McGill University in Canada did a very good research study on the fact that smartphones are just not a sustainable product. Now, you look at the manufacturing, how much climate damage impact of one single smartphone. You have to hold onto your smartphone for 40 years before you can neutralize its carbon footprint. Because all the minerals, if you think about, we know there's precious metals, rare earths and everything in the screens. So and we're being told and we're being trained to change our smartphones every 2 years. So the massive detrimental impact of a smartphone can no longer be ignored. I just think it's going to be like the smoking lobby, that within a matter of years, for young people, it's going to be considered ill-mannered and a bad look to be using a smartphone. One, because of the climate change impact. Two, the data usage. Every post you put on Facebook, every post you put on social media. Facebook, by the way, and Twitter and Instagram, they all are clear on this. They actually have official company policies trying to say, look, it's not so bad when you post on our platforms because we've taken measures to try and neutralize and reduce the carbon footprint of all you millions of people posting all the time. So live streaming is really bad. in terms of data usage. Because remember, there's also a lobby now, or a growing group of us saying machine learning, which is what most people consider is AI, that in itself is also climate change, has a huge impact, because machine learning requires a lot of data server power. So the more data server power you need for your individual smartphone, billions of smartphones being traded in every 2 years when they shouldn't be, or if you're in machine learning and you want to do all this data modeling, number crunching, it's going to have a huge impact because of the millions of data centers we need to process all this data, even if you're just posting photos or saving photos. So it's becoming mainstream. I even saw something on Sky News the other week, a headline article saying, clear your dead data, it's harming the environment. So delete all the archive photos you don't need, don't save emails, delete that. So it's going to be like smoking. Smoking is just not a good look because it's bad for your health, blah, blah. Well, guess what? Cut down on your emailing, cut down on your live stream, your Netflix consumption. And therefore, getting back to it being an AI venture, we have to look carefully in planning ahead which devices are going to survive in the next 5 years, given we're going to have to look at the prism of climate change and the near destruction of our planet.
Wow. Tanya, thank you so much for those stats and that impact. I have mixed thoughts personally on power, because I think we could be having all the renewable energy we needed right now in 2021 if it hadn't been for serious blockages along the way and prevention and lobbying to make sure that we're still heavily reliant on damaging fossil fuels now in 2021. And if you look at the grander scale, the Kardashev scale, if you like, civilization will increase its power usage. And I suppose I'd rather see impressive AI models that reduce impact on climate than just tearing down one building and putting another one up in its place because it looks a bit nicer and not dealing with any of the CO2 that came out of that. So I think, there is a sense that, we do need that cleaner fuel. And of course, like you say, let's not sit on thousands of images and emails that we just don't need, because that's just wasteful.
Yeah, I mean, AI, if we're going to really get to the nuts and bolts of what is AI, it is data. There's nothing, magical and mysterious about it. It's not some monstrous robot about to kill us. It really is simply and purely data and different types of algorithms that are used to render that data. And to do that, you need the data servers. And they are massive complexes using, as you say, fossil fuel forms of power. But that's not really the issue. The issue is, how are we going to push forward smarter cities? Because smarter cities, I think, on the whole, are a good thing for green tech. If smart cities can be done to cut down the use of cars, like Milton Keynes, where you're sitting right now, right? I saw that you've got robots running around. Now, getting back to the topic of it today, social licensing. How many people did you get asked if you wanted a robot rolling past your door that might be taking a photo of you when you come out of your door? For me, that's what social licensing means. I know several countries in the world banned Google Maps from that time when they were creating Google Maps and sending cars out to do surveillance, to record people's streets and houses because of privacy concerns. So when the rollout of robots, and just so in case people don't know about the Milton Keynes example, you've got robots who are now currently delivering food to people, right? Which is on the one hand great, because we don't have cars doing those deliveries, which we've seen in the pandemic, a massive uptake in personal deliveries, and the carbon footprint of bring me one single meal and the carbon footprint of a car delivering that to you just for a selfish one single meal, and single-use plastic and all the stuff that goes with all those deliveries. But you've got robots now in Milton Keynes running around, and was that socially licensed? Do you know?
Not even sure it was licensed for the pavements, from what I heard, but I think that's a secret. No, I think that's not supposed to go out.
This is the subject of the thing tonight, isn't it?
Incredible point, Tanya, and I'll ask Jason to pick up on a question in a second. Matthew's showing a section from his book, and Amazon Ring turned out to be mapping, didn't it, and connecting and being a surveillance platform that you could then go and buy. And I don't think Starship had those kind of designs in mind. Sorry, Starship make the robots.
Right. It's an Estonian company.
But
no, sure
camera's a camera.
Yeah. But that for me, when I was looking at the subject tonight of AI, social licensing, we have to look at it from a practical entrepreneurial point of view. So the Estonian company is great, very innovative. I'm sure the product in itself is all above board. But if we're going to go into the realm of what's acceptable, for example, another UK example, there was facial recognition done around the Cross in London, where corporates had people recognizing people's faces, but nobody really knew. So I think in the terms of smart city development and trying to make green tech happen through smart city technology, social licensing means not only getting, concretely stakeholder buy-in is what will it be? Will it be putting up notices everywhere saying, old school legacy posters? By the way, we're capturing your face and we're going to use it for creating a smart city. Because interestingly, I'll just say this on all the regulatory points that were raised tonight by the different speakers, the EU's AI directive has banned facial recognition. And now that's only happened since April this year, but it had a direct impact from me and my company because we definitely can't use facial recognition in our holographic avatars when they're out there doing wayfinding and giving people walking around the town wayfinding advice, concierge, tourist information, and so on. We can't install a camera because that's now illegal in the EU. And also what's now illegal through the AI directive is sentient analysis. So all the chatbots, there's chatbot companies in the UK that are going ahead with doing sentient emotional analysis of emotions. That's now illegal in the European Union under the latest AI directive. So this is having a direct impact. What other speakers tonight said is it will guide innovation. We need a predictable framework. So you know what you're allowed to do there. Now we know in the EMEA market, we're allowed to go so far with speech recognition, and mixed reality is what they call the metaverse in the EU. But in the UK, we can, because people seem to have not wanted to participate in the social licensing aspect, that they're going to say, okay, it's fine to go ahead, take a photo of my face, recognize me wherever I go, and use that data for what do I know? I don't know.
Absolutely. I think, Tanya, these are just brilliant points, and how the different countries or regions are now looking at what could be the legal path or which needs regulation when it comes to AI or even the metaverse, or what the bigger corporates are doing. I think we should take some thoughts from somebody on the panel as well as to whatever points you have raised. Do you think, Daniel, I think Jackie wants to say something. Jackie, would you like to add something to what Tanya has just said?
Yeah, thanks for that, Tanya. That was really interesting. And I think the point you made very early on about we need to be clear what we mean when we just use the phrase AI, because it's bandied around and it means, as you say, lots and lots of things. And there are whole aspects of it that we shouldn't be worried about, whether we set we look at a weather data set and we create an algorithm to look at patterns to see if we can predict the future of weather and so on. That's fantastic. It's AI that impacts on humans is what we're concerned about. And I think what few people realize is the point you made is essentially it's data, and very few of us realize that the data that is used to design, practice, pilot and build the models is data that we've surrendered. We've signed the terms and conditions to every single thing we've used. In some, we probably haven't known that data is being collected publicly, but we have provided the fuel for the modeling anyway. And we, people are very, this is not an accusatory term, are ignorant about the amount of data that they surrender in every interaction that they have with a device or online. And they don't realize how many data points are already collected and known about them. And these form the basis of the models and the practicing for things that we do. So I think, education and public education about what it means to, one of the things that we're doing in the UK is trying to enforce in our regulation of the internet terms and conditions that have to be meaningful, and that you can't just say because you're a Facebook user, that all of your data is allowed to be used in anything that Facebook wants to use from now on, which is what the terms and conditions currently say. There is no transparency. So I think public education, understanding what it is that you're doing, what is the deal when you have any type of interaction with any device or any platform, what is the deal, what are you surrendering, because that is fueling, is really important. And I do think this space is really tricky for people because it's science and it's technology and it feels like sci-fi and it feels like futuristic and it feels like maths. And those are things that we are not generally as a public super comfortable about. You know, when I was young, which is a very long time ago, we used to have public education films on the television about loads of aspects of life, which were really simple. They sound really patronizing now, but they were a way to tell you about things without making you feel stupid that you might not have otherwise known. And I'm not suggesting we do those, but there is definitely an argument to be made about explaining, and this will be government's responsibility, about explaining to people what is possible, what's not possible, what's the deal, what they're signing up for, what AI means, and so on. And that absolutely needs to happen. And we've seen it happen in other arenas, so it's not impossible. And I think in the UK, back to when we first developed IVF, the science to be able to create life artificially, in vitro fertilization. I mean, that was, if anything, was groundbreaking, messing with biology, messing with Darwin, that was. So the science came along, the tech came along, it became possible, but what did we think about it? You know, what did we think about that possibility? And so we created an agency, it was called HEFA, the Human Embryo Fertilization Authority, which was a panel of great minds. It was lawyers, it was philosophers, it was ethicists, it was academics. And this panel listened to the public, put out consultations, you know, literally opened up this new ethical frontier to people and said, just because we can, does it mean we should? And developed a set of rules around the use of IVF. And then they've gone on to change them over time. And I think that was a fantastic model in which you got a kind of engagement and education, plus you pulled in great minds and said, what's this technology possible? What's it possible of doing? What do we want of that? And what are we slightly worried about, and where are the boundaries? And we definitely need to create that kind of education and those kind of spaces and those kind of forums that allow the public to feel like they're not stupid, but they can engage, they can read the consultations, and that great minds are thinking about these issues and, you know, and rolling over them in their minds and so on. And that seems like, you know, a good other model to stick into the space.
Okay, can I just go back to something that Danielle Davis said? I think she really hit it on the head. I don't know if Danielle's still there, but she said there's 3 ways to combat where we are with all the things going wrong where people aren't being included. And it's to educate, that companies, and I really strongly agree with this from the industry, from the private sector, and being an entrepreneur, is that she said we need to foundationally take account of ethics and AI and reimagine what diversity inclusion looks like. And I think that's my takeaway from this evening, is that she's spot on, because most entrepreneurs, you know, and they are majority white, and it really angers me because they're white males around the 30-year-old mark, and you're just not taken seriously if you don't fit that, you know, stereotype as a founder. So if they actually held to account and GDPR or the California Act, which is the equivalent of the strongest or the closest example of GDPR in the USA, is the California privacy laws and so on. If they held to account, say foundationally show us that you have a duty of care, or you have an onus of proof. I studied law, I have a legal background. Actually, the onus of proof for you to found a company in this area, this mass gray area of AI, show us as the regulator, show us as the users, you have the onus of proof, the entrepreneurs, that you are doing the correct thing. Show us your eco consideration. How many Black people have you hired? How many people of color? Have you tested the technology on people of color as well as white people? And it's also going into biotech. Like currently the UK has called for an investigation in the COVID pandemic, that there was a piece of high-tech equipment which for sure uses AI to test oxygen levels in Black people and people of color that weren't tested, and therefore they were wrongly assessed as to not having the correct enough oxygen, because the technology has an inbuilt racial differentiation purely on its test foundation, nothing deliberate. But this has to go back to the foundations, that you can't just bring a product or a service onto the market, because let's face it, just about everything in emerging technologies is using AI. So because of the data processing aspect. So if we can get that out of the way, that it's going to be AI powered, if you like, and why wasn't it tested on all people in its user base?
Thanks, Tanya. I think there is an urgent need of the public disclosure that we are seeing, that Jackie has really highlighted. And Daniel, I would like to ask you, I know we are really short of time here. There are 5 minutes to go and we always end on time, but very quickly I'll be going around the room. And Daniel, what do you think about the shared vernacular that we need to have, which is missing at the moment? There is no agreement, there are no rules, and we are talking about the education of the public. How do we proceed with this? Because there's an urgent need to do this now, as people do not know what's happening to them and their data itself.
Yeah, these are the questions that I grapple with on a daily basis. How do we get people to understand like the actual issues that aren't necessarily visible a lot of the times? Not like you can see, like what I put in a lot of my writing is that I would say that like discrimination historically could be felt. It could be felt. You can't go to this school because you're Black. But if you are online, sometimes you're excluded from spaces and you don't even know you are. So there has to be that number one, just understanding that aspect. Sometimes you're not even going to know you're excluded. Sometimes you're going to have to take a little bit more research and just be a little bit more diligent in understanding what you're on, like understanding the internet, understanding like those things that you sign, and understanding like what it means when you're giving up your information. Like we have to let people know, because we are in a new space. We are going into this world that's dictated by AI, and it's only going to get more and more influenced. So I would say, honestly, we're still working on these questions. Like, how do we educate people? Like, but the bigger question, like I said, and what I have seen that others agree with is, how are the companies going to really address their issue? Because this is mostly this is really their issue, if we're going to be honest about it. Like, they need to be figuring out how they can be bringing us to the table, and not after the product has been established, released, and all this, and you bring in a Black diversity and inclusion officer at the end. No, we need everybody from day one all the way to when we are going to have the diversity and inclusion officer talking about the product. So I would just say these are questions that we all need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking about how we can educate our families, the public, our friends, and just go from there. These platforms are great. This has been a great discussion. I know that these platforms are probably very beneficial to a lot of the citizens. So I would say these platforms, educating your family, and just putting a lot of pressure on the companies to rethink and reimagine what diversity and inclusion means in their companies.
Thanks, Daniel. And quickly, with 2 minutes left on the clock, Nicole, I would like to quickly ask you, since Daniel has raised such important points, do you think, because the rules are so unclear, what is the role of the important range of stakeholders that we have, and what are they going to be playing in the future? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it from, a public sector perspective, inclusive engagement and communication is so important. And that means, reaching out to, engaging, seeking feedback from all types of communities, everybody that's going to be impacted or touched by some new technology deployment. We're seeing how that's kind of playing out in real time as we watch the development of autonomous vehicle technology. A lot of cities are piloting this. A lot of cities are trying low-speed pilots, low-speed shuttles, things like that. And just like any other, kind of city project, standard city project, they have to kind of rethink and truly engage in that kind of public outreach and education phase of the project, and really step back and take a look at, who is this impacting, who wants it, do we want it, does it impact and serve all members of our community? I think one of the really challenging, I guess you could say, wicked questions is how we address things like language and cultural barriers when you essentially can't function without some sort of connectivity in today's society. So, kind of in stepping back and touching on something that Danielle brought up, in some ways, people don't necessarily have a choice when it comes to participation. You can't apply for really any job without a smartphone. That's an example that was brought up. So, when we're asking people to read the terms and conditions, and we're asking people to really have a good sense of the platform that they're using before they use it, we have to ask ourselves, is that fair? Because do they have a choice, right? Have we kind of jumped the shark in that way, and that people don't have a choice, to opt out in a lot of cases. So, is it really fair, I think, to ask them to, do due diligence and do their research on some of these things? I know that's really challenging, and certainly we don't want to discourage people from having a fair understanding of what they're using, or a platform that they're employing to do certain things. But I think in some cases we have to step back, especially when we're seeing the lines blur between public and private services and everything like that. Do people have a choice but to use these platforms, rely on these services? I think unfortunately some cases the answer is no. So we have to take one step further than saying, well, you have to read the terms and conditions, or you have to understand what you're doing. Some people, there might not be that choice or capacity to do so.
Thanks, Nicole, for adding that. Unfortunately, we are short of time. We are 2 minutes over, and I have to hand over to Richard. I couldn't go across the room, the entire panel, but we can do it in the after party. Richard, over to you. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much. 120 seconds over, but we're close. I'll just do a very quick thank you. So to our speakers, in order that we saw them tonight, thank you, Rupa, Matthew, Jackie, Nicole, Danielle, Oriana, Jibu, and Tanya. A lot of speakers tonight. And so there's so much to cram in. Thank you to all of those who joined us here at MKU. Wonderful to see you here on campus with us. Thank you, Vibhab, for the updates. And of course, Jaisal, thank you so much to you for hosting. So we draw the official event to a close now. Just ticked past 7 p.m. here in the UK. Thank you to everybody for your generosity and your kindness in your time tonight. But we will keep this open, and let's keep this debate going for what we call our party time. So different energy, hopefully. So those who need to get back to their work, those who want to have dinner or go to bed, go ahead now. This is the end of the journey, this incredible journey that our speakers have taken on today. Those who want to stick around and chat about it, then please do and enjoy the conversation. Thank you all very much. We're going to take a little break in December for good behavior, and we'll be back in January for a packed year in 2022 and see what we might achieve. Thank you, everybody.